What if what you called a failure was actually God saving you from something you couldn't see? What if the pain weighing on your chest right now was just the beginning of something infinitely better? Something you can't even imagine yet. Sophie didn't know any of that as she boarded the plane, her eyes swollen from crying, her heart torn between the family she was leaving behind and the overwhelming uncertainty ahead. At the airport, the long hugs, the promises that everything would be okay, the silent tears she tried to hide from Daniel. It all felt too heavy to bear. On paper, moving to another country seemed like the right decision. But deep inside, Sophie felt like they were leaving more than just a city behind. They were leaving a part of themselves. The flight was quiet. Sophie stared out the window, watching her city disappear under a blanket of clouds, like part of her story was being erased. She shut her eyes, trying to burn the image into her memory, afraid even her memories might eventually fade away. When they landed, the shock was immediate. A new language, new faces, new customs. Sophie felt completely lost. Even ordering a simple coffee was a challenge. Daniel, busy with his new job, tried to stay positive. But for Sophie, every day felt like a silent battle against the feeling that she didn't belong. Sunday mornings were the worst. The distance from her family weighed heavy on her chest, and the silence of their tiny apartment was deafening. Some days, Sophie thought about giving up, going back home, even if she had no idea how. Have you ever felt completely out of place, like your soul wasn't where it was supposed to be? If you have, share a word in the comments that describes that feeling. Your words could be the light someone else desperately needs. Sophie hid her emptiness behind rehearsed smiles during video calls, but the moment she hung up, the tears would come without warning. She was scared to admit how broken she felt, scared of disappointing everyone who believed she was strong. What was supposed to be a fresh start became a desert where every step forward felt heavier than the last. Sitting by the window, staring at a city that still didn't feel like home, Sophie wondered if she had made the right choice, or if she had unknowingly lost herself forever. The first days blurred together. Sophie wandered the streets near their apartment, trying to stay busy, but everything felt cold and distant. She missed silly little things, the smell of her mom's morning coffee, carefree talks with her sisters, the way she knew every shortcut in her hometown. Here even the silence was different, a colder silence that only made the loneliness louder. Daniel did his best to lift her spirits, bringing home cheap flowers from the market, planning small outings, trying to make this new chapter feel lighter. But he carried his own struggles too. Work stress, fear that they had made a huge mistake, restless nights. Sophie saw it in his eyes, and the guilt quietly grew inside her. How could she ask for more when he was already doing everything he could? Trying to fit into this new world only made her feel worse. Each awkward conversation, every time she got lost, each polite rejection, they all whispered the same thing: "You don't belong here." And every little failure stacked up, becoming a weight she carried alone. One afternoon, after yet another failed job interview, Sophie sat on a park bench, watching kids play, families laugh, couples stroll hand in hand. She felt like a spectator in her own life, like everyone else knew exactly where they belonged and she was just surviving. Have you ever felt like that, like you're just watching life happen around you while you're stuck on the outside? If you have, share your story in the comments. Sometimes just knowing we're not alone gives us the strength to keep going. That day, Sophie realized her pain wasn't just about being far from home. It was the feeling of being lost between two worlds, the one she left behind and the one she couldn't quite step into yet. At night, lying next to Daniel, pretending to sleep, her mind kept spinning. Was God even seeing her down here? Did he know that she had uprooted everything and still hadn't found where she was supposed to grow? There were no easy answers. And maybe, just maybe, that's where true transformation begins. In the empty spaces between doubt and faith, where only God can fill the void we don't understand yet. Time passed, but the feeling of not belonging never really left Sophie. Some days it even got worse. The small frustrations piled up. A bill she didn't know how to pay, a neighbor's suspicious glance, cold service at a store where she just wanted to be understood. It was like life kept reminding her, "You don't belong here." And without even realizing it, Sophie started shutting down. Daniel tried to fill the silence with plans. Future trips, dreams about what they could build there. But to Sophie, every mention of staying felt like a chain. Video calls with her family became fewer. She didn't know what to say anymore. How do you explain that even tiny moments of happiness felt colorless now? How do you admit that the dream you both chased now felt like a silent prison? One freezing night, Sophie finally hit rock bottom. She was alone in their tiny apartment while Daniel worked late. City lights glowed outside, but inside, everything felt dark. She sat on the floor, knees pulled to her chest, and for the first time since they moved, she said it out loud. "I can't do this anymore." Despair flooded her. She thought about leaving, about running away, about how maybe, just maybe, she had made the worst mistake of her life. Have you ever had a moment like that? When the pain felt so big that you just wanted to disappear? If you have, drop a word in the comments that describes it. Sometimes naming the pain is the first step toward healing. When Daniel got home, he found Sophie curled up on the floor. He didn't say anything. He just sat next to her and pulled her into his arms. She cried there in his lap, no words needed. No magic solutions. No quick fixes. Just two broken hearts surviving together. That night, Sophie realized something. Maybe strength isn't pretending everything's fine. Maybe real strength is being broken in front of someone you love, and choosing to stay anyway. Not because it's easy, but because something deeper is still worth fighting for. The next morning dawned quietly, like even the city understood something inside Sophie had cracked open. She woke up before sunrise, her face still puffy from the night before. Daniel slept deeply beside her, drained not just from work, but from carrying so much invisible weight. Sophie stayed there a moment, watching him, feeling a strange mix of guilt and gratitude. Deep down she knew. He had left so much behind too. This wasn't just her battle. It was theirs. Without really knowing why, she decided to go for a walk. She pulled on a thick coat, laced up her sneakers, and slipped out of the apartment quietly. The streets were empty, the cold air stung her face, but there was something comforting about the emptiness. Every step, no matter how unsure, felt like it whispered, "You're still here. You're still trying." She wandered aimlessly until she found a little coffee shop on the corner. The fogged-up windows barely showed a handful of people inside. Without thinking much, she walked in. The smell of hot coffee and fresh bread wrapped around her like an old memory, like afternoons back home at her mom's favorite bakery. Sophie sat down by the window and ordered a coffee in the hesitant English she was still practicing. That's when an older woman with silver hair and a warm smile sat at the next table. They exchanged a shy hello and somehow they started talking. It wasn't a deep, life-changing conversation. It was simple. They talked about the cold morning, missing home, the hard parts of settling somewhere new. And then, almost casually, the woman said something Sophie would never forget. Sometimes God moves us from where we want to be, so He can grow us where we're meant to be. Sophie didn't say anything. She just let those words fall deep inside her, like a seed too small to notice, but powerful enough to change everything. Have you ever heard a simple phrase, something so casual, that completely changed how you saw a hard season in your life? If you have, share it in the comments. Sometimes those tiny seeds grow into the biggest changes when the time is right. When Sophie left the coffee shop, she wasn't magically healed. It wasn't like a movie where one conversation fixes everything. But there was something different now. A tiny thread of hope. Almost invisible, but real. Maybe, just maybe, this wasn't a mistake. Maybe the discomfort was just part of being replanted. For the first time in a long time, Sophie tilted her face up to the gray sky and smiled, even if it was a small, uncertain smile. Maybe it wasn't about understanding everything right now. Maybe it was about trusting the process happening inside her that she couldn't see yet. The next few days weren't exactly easier, but something inside Sophie had shifted. She no longer saw the new country as a life sentence, but as unfamiliar ground where new life could still grow. With fresh courage, she decided to take small steps. She enrolled in an English class at the community center, And during the afternoons when Daniel was working, she forced herself to get out of the apartment, walk around, learn the names of the streets, and start recognizing familiar faces. One afternoon, while walking through the neighborhood, she spotted a flyer pinned to a tree. Volunteers needed for a local food drive. Without thinking twice, she jotted down the number. When she got the confirmation that she could help, she felt a mix of fear and pride. It was just a small gesture, but for Sophie it meant everything. At the event, Sophie met others who were also carrying stories of quiet restarts. Stories of people who had lost more than they owned, but who still chose to believe that life held something more than pain. Each conversation, each exchanged smile, was another brick laid in rebuilding her inner world. And little by little, without even realizing it, Sophie started to belong. Daniel noticed the change. At home, Sophie wasn't just talking about sadness and homesickness anymore. She spoke about little encounters, new words she had learned, tentative plans for the future. The apartment, once cold and hollow, now filled with shy laughter, soft music, and dinners eaten cross-legged on the floor. Have you ever realized that sometimes it's not the big, dramatic moments, but the small decisions that end up quietly redrawing the entire map of your life? If a simple choice has ever planted something new in you, share it in the comments. Your story might be exactly the encouragement someone needs to take their next step. Sophie still missed her family. She still longed for sunny Sundays and the smell of fresh coffee at her parents' house. But now there was something else too. Gratitude for the life she and Daniel were slowly building. It wasn't the future she had pictured. It was better because it was real, imperfect, and theirs. At night, she and Daniel would walk hand in hand through the quiet streets of their new neighborhood, talking about old dreams, dreaming up new ones. And as Sophie looked at him, she felt her heart warm with the certainty that even in all the unknowns, one thing remained true. Where there is love, there is always victory. And somewhere in the middle of those quiet walks, under a sky full of unfamiliar stars that were starting to feel like home, Sophie realized something. Maybe all those things she once thought were mistakes were really the foundation of a life she wouldn't have had the courage to dream for herself. Time kept moving quietly, and before Sophie even realized it, she wasn't a stranger in that city anymore. She knew the faces at the bakery down the street, the prettiest paths to the park, the name of the old lady who sold flowers on Saturday mornings. Without even noticing, she had started planting roots in soil that once felt so barren. It wasn't one big achievement that marked this change. It was the small things, the everyday moments, the simple, steady presence of trying again and again, even when everything inside her said to give up. One crisp autumn afternoon, sitting on a park bench with Daniel beside her, Sophie pulled out an old notebook and started writing a letter to her family. But this time, it wasn't filled with sadness or overwhelming homesickness. It was filled with gratitude. She wrote about the fears she had conquered, the unexpected friendships she had made, the quiet lessons she had learned through the pain. And most of all, she wrote about love, the love that had carried her through, that made every broken piece worth mending. As she wrote, tears slid down her face, but they were different now. They weren't tears of despair. They were tears of fullness. Because deep down she knew it had never been a mistake. It wasn't a loss. It was God, carefully pulling her away from the life she would have settled for, and leading her toward a life she never dared to dream. Have you ever lived through something that felt like an ending, only to realize later it was actually a hidden beginning? If you have, share your story in the comments. Your words might be exactly the hope someone else needs today. Sophie closed her notebook and leaned her head against Daniel's shoulder. The cold breeze played with her hair, but she didn't mind. For the first time in a long time, she felt exactly where she was meant to be. The longing for home was still there. Some aches don't disappear, they simply change shape. But now, she knew that wherever love is planted, victory grows. Even if she couldn't see it at first. She looked at Daniel, smiling as he watched the world around them, and she smiled too. Life wasn't perfect. The road hadn't been easy. But standing there, between all the questions that still remained, there was one answer shining brighter than anything else. Where there is love, there is always victory. If this story touched your heart, leave a word or a feeling down in the comments. Let's build a chain of hope together, for everyone who might need a little extra strength today. And if you want to keep hearing stories like this, stories that warm the soul and remind us that no beginning is ever wasted, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Because at the end of the day, it's by taking one more step that we find the place where miracles happen.